This episode is brought to you by Roundtable Group, the experts on experts. We've been connecting attorneys with experts for over 30 years. Find out more at roundtablegroup.com.
Welcome to Engaging Experts. I'm your host, Noah Ballmer, and today I'm excited to welcome three distinguished panelists to the show, all returning guests. First off is Jonathan Klane, Senior Manager on the Safety Business Development Team at Draeger, a medical and safety technology firm. He's an experienced expert witness and a Ph.D. candidate in human and social dimensions of science and technology at Arizona State University. Mr. Klane, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Noah.
Also joining us is Mike Favetta, a meteorologist and the owner of WeatherPrep LLC, a meteorology consulting firm. In addition to meteorology, his expertise spans climatology and the environment. Mr. Favetta has over 13 years of expert witness experience and holds a degree in Atmospheric Sciences and Meteorology from Keene University. Mr. Favetta, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Noah, great to be back.
And finally, we're joined by Dr. Elliot Fishman. He is the founder and CEO of Astrina, Inc., a litigation support firm specializing in securities valuation. He is a sought-after expert, a Ph.D. economist, and a published author. He holds multiple advanced degrees, including a Wharton MBA and a Ph.D. from the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Fishman, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Nice to see you again, Noah.
Let's jump into it. Today's panel is on the topic of relationships. Every engagement is dependent not only upon the expertise and experience of the expert witnesses, but a web of interactions between members of the trial team and the expert. At the core is a relationship between the expert and the attorney. Mr. Klane, how do you get off on the right foot with attorneys? How do you get started?
Well, I think it's a great question. How do you get started? It often is an email, and you respond in the email, perhaps with some little bit of enthusiasm for the case or something that makes a link, whatever. I live in Arizona, but most of my clients are back in Maine, where I'm from. So mentioning that sometimes is good. And then in the first meeting where you can really bond, trying to make some sort of connection and smile and indicate that, you think it's an interesting case and that you think you can help based on what you've learned so far, but you're very interested in hearing much more about it.
Dr. Fishman, same question.
My approach is, to treat each engagement at the highest levels of professionalism, and that is to consult with a lot of information and data right up front, and not necessarily to start the clock right away. I give away some free hours, some research and some consultation, 2 or 3 hours right up front. I will read the complaint, take a look at the background, take a look at the motions, maybe take a glance at the case law if I don't know a subject matter firsthand, and give the attorney an interesting perspective that he or she may not have thought of as they're sizing up the case, and really demonstrate your value added from the very start.
Mr. Favetta?
Yeah, Mr. Klane and Dr. Fishman bring up some really good points about developing that rapport, understanding that there might be some aspects of the case that, we may not know of for intentional reasons. Maybe the hiring party, whether it's the attorney or the paralegal who reaches out, doesn't want to be upfront and give all the information from A to Z, do the conflict checked off the bat. But essentially, there's also, I've found in my decade plus of doing this, is there are different attitudes around it. There are some hiring parties, that being the attorney or the firm, that are very straight shooters that want to go at this in a very analytical way and, keep the meetings very professional. And there's others that have more of a lighthearted atmosphere to it. I'm based in the New York area, and there's some guys that I work with on Staten Island who are very, take the Zoom from their home office with the top button undone on their shirt, and they're very casual, and we just have a conversation. But there are others that have the formal meeting room with the glass walls and the big conference table, making sure it looks all professional and such. So I would say there's more of a what's the feeling going into it, and kind of starting the conversation on that note. Are we taking the more straight and narrow professional route, or is this more of an introduction in an informal sense? And I think based on that, there's more of a relationship developing right off the bat that way.
Do you have a preference? Do you prefer it when it's a little bit more loose and casual?
So I love there was this one call that I received. It was a cold call from an expert witness search firm, one of those directories. And the attorney was this prominent local advertising, like you see his face on the side of the buses and at the benches at the bus stops. And he advertised on local TV. And he was this prominent Italian American, very active in the community, saw my last name, also of that heritage. And we kind of kicked it off on, on that note, and saying after a while, with this poor little old lady, she slipped and fell, and we need to know the weather. And after 10 minutes of talking, we developed this rapport where it turned into, you know what? Such and such assistant, cancel my other appointments for the rest of the day. I want Mike. We're gonna go forward with the retainer and work with him on this case. So it really depends on how, I guess, those initial first few moments go. And that was one of my favorite experiences, if you will. There have been others that were a complete 180, and it lasted 5 minutes, and they thought, really not getting much from you. Bye. But otherwise, they've been better rather than worse.
Dr. Fishman, does that comport with your experience as well? Have you had a variety of more casual and more professional encounters when you're getting started for a new engagement?
To be honest, I have not. I'm in the finance field. Do a lot of work for Wall Street law firms.
So it tends to be, I assume, a bit more on the professional side.
Gosh, half the time you don't know if you're being interviewed or if you're being put on the stand yourself. but it's just hold your own and highest levels of professionalism, keep it buttoned up in my field and experience.
Absolutely. Let's talk about red flags. What are some of the things that happen right off the bat that make you think to yourself, oh boy, I'm not sure if I'm going to take this engagement. This is not for me.
Two things. One, when I am not convinced there is a case there, or that I am not sure whether it's plaintiff or defendant, whether I'm on the winning side. And you don't really know who's on the winning side until it grinds through litigation, but you can get a sense pretty early on if you're being asked to defend something that is substantially indefensible. And I shy away from those situations because it puts everyone in an awkward situation.
Yeah, this is a good question. I've been fortunate that I have not to date experienced any significant red flags. I assume that what Dr. Fishman is talking about when he says the winning side, meaning I think perhaps the moral or ethical side, not trying to predict the outcome of the case.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so very often my cases are workplace or non-workplace injuries, serious exposures leading to potentially life-threatening illness, or very sadly, many are fatalities. And so while not always, very often I'm working for plaintiff attorneys who are suing, and they're always interesting. There's always a case there. It may not be the best case. I think for a red flag, it would be if the potential client attorney were to indicate in a way that was very clear some type of disregard for safety and health, not necessarily a disregard for regulations, but a disregard for the safety and health of other people. And so I think it's somewhat lining up with what Dr. Fishman was talking about. We're really talking about moral and ethical imperatives. But I'll end with, I've been very fortunate that has not been the case with my clients. I cannot say the same about opposing counsel.
Mr. Favetta, have you had any major red flags go up that prevented you from taking an engagement?
So no, I would say the biggest red flag is when the hiring party comes out of the gate and uses the B word and they start with budget. Well, we really don't have a lot of money to pay you, and well, we weren't intending to go down this route with cost. And I'm thinking to myself, why are we wasting each other's time? I mean, if it's something as simple as looking up some forensic data, producing a quick report, and this is what you need to submit to the judge because you were admonished for not giving an expert report with your motion, fine. But when it comes to, well, I need all of this data and I'm stuck and help me with my case, but we can't really afford to do the big, chunk of change for your fee. That's when I think it's a big red flag of I don't think this is going to work out.
Along those lines, this is for all of our panelists. Have any of you had a situation where you have taken an engagement, didn't go so well? There weren't any red flags at the start, but it didn't end up going great, and you would know you would not take a future engagement from that same attorney. How do you deal with getting a call from an attorney who wants to use you, but you're pretty sure that you don't want them? How do you say no?
Yeah, right. I haven't had to say no. I have dealt with, I think you were the opposing counsel in a case of mine, or your law firm. Usually it's the law firm and not specifically the person, the actual attorney. And to be honest, usually that's not an issue. I did have, so my very first case, I was incredibly inexperienced. I was naive to the process, did not really understand it. And unfortunately, the client attorney did absolutely zero preparation with me for a deposition with a very skilled attorney. So it went cataclysmically badly for my client, and he wasn't even there. He gave it to an absolutely junior attorney who literally never said a thing, right? And I think we're
Right.
all used to, objection, form, and function, or something along that line. And so we learned primarily through our mistakes. We talk about this a lot in safety. It's incredible to do so. The additionally interesting thing is he ended up being opposing counsel in pretty much my last case. So we're talking really bookends to my expert witness career. And I mentioned it to my client attorney, whom I knew from many, many cases. And I said, here's, what I did, here's what happened, here's what went wrong, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, okay, I appreciate you letting me know. I don't think he'll even bring it up. To be honest with you, John, we're talking decades ago. I'm willing to bet he doesn't even remember it at this point. But if he does, don't worry about it. It's likely not even something that he would address. And my client was correct. It never came up. There were other things that did instead. And so it's been a fortunate one, but that first case, literally, I don't know, 30 years ago, something like that at this point, taught me a tremendous amount about what it really should be like.
It's interesting that you bring up kind of the team aspect. There's attorneys, but there's also junior attorneys. Sometimes there's paralegals that get involved. And a lot of people who haven't been expert witnesses or aren't attorneys don't realize how large trial teams can be, depending on the specific action, obviously. What is the intersection of some of those relationships? In other words, when you first get an engagement, who do you typically talk to? Are you always talking to the attorney? Do you sometimes get a paralegal on the phone? Who is it that you are typically working with at the beginning and then throughout an engagement? I'll start with you, Dr. Fishman.
Usually it's the senior partner on the case who actually reaches out. Well, actually, the associate reaches out for a screening call. And once we get through that, then I go in to a big conference room and the senior partner is there.
Yeah, I would say it varies on the size of the firm. If it's a smaller case, there usually is just the attorney that whose name is on all the documents. But if it's a larger firm, then there would be the layers of assistants and paralegals working your way up to basically the person who's signing all of the motions and working with that attorney directly after a few layers of peeling that onion back.
Do you ever feel a little bit sidelined by getting somebody who is one of the more junior members and having to kind of work up the ranks to get the real answer to your question? Or do you feel that typically trial teams are pretty well-oiled machines and the correct person is working with you, the expert?
Yeah, I would say that in terms of working with the right person, in the beginning, there's always the hesitancy. There's almost like a delay, if you will, of getting to the right person. So it tends to slow things down a bit. But once that person realizes your value, realizes they should have been working with you all along, it kind of all the other initial contacts, they go out the window, and you're exclusively talking to the attorney on their cell phone on weekends, making sure everything is done correctly.
Once we have cleared ourselves of red flags and we've got the right person and we are starting our engagement, how do you maintain a positive attorney expert relationship? What are the factors that make things go smoothly for both the end client and the expert witness?
Meeting deadlines. Be very aware of the court schedule for deadlines. That is the case management in order, as well as the attorney's deadlines, because they want to see everything a week or two in advance to review.
I would say meeting deadlines is important, and Dr. Fishman nailed that. But also, when asked to make your own deadline, to make sure it's reasonable, because sometimes there's so much information out there, and you get three other calls from three other firms that needed reports yesterday. There is a fine balance of, you know, keeping your hiring party pleased, but also managing your own time and workload efficiently.
Mr. Klane?
Yeah, so I like what Dr. Fishman and Mr. Favetta have discussed about deadlines, so I won't replicate that. I would say, you know, a lot of my career has been as a consultant, not solely as an expert witness. And so when you're a consultant, you know, you're trying your best to meet your client's needs, whatever they are. And, you know, this is pretty much, you know, that same dynamic. I've got a client, I'm their consultant. I don't know yet what they need. So trying to figure out what they need, but then also trying to provide them with information that I have that they may not have. They may have it, but they may not. So that might include, for me, I deal a lot with the regulations of, say, like OSHA or EPA or others, but there could be other aspects besides regulations that play significant roles, policies and things of that nature, consensus standards that I would then bring up. The other is I always also provide them with, here is what I would testify to or do if I were on the other side. So, you know, trying to do that, what if, you know, what do I think someone might come back at me just from my perspective? I'm not trying to put myself in the position of the opposing counsel. I'm trying to put myself in the position of the opposing witness, you know, which of course I think we probably all have dealt with. So trying to meet their needs. Also, the last thing I would say is, as with, I think, a lot of interactions, but this is just one, is trying to make it easy on them, trying not to make what can be a challenging process more difficult. So, you know, one of my first questions is, how do you operate when it comes to how you want information exchanged? You know, do you want phone calls? Do you want emails? What do you want in email? And please tell me what you don't want in the email. Tell me when you want something in writing. Until then, I'm not putting anything in writing, but give me your specific needs, because I've found they can vary tremendously, even if you're in the same jurisdiction. So I think that's an important aspect for any expert witness to keep in mind.
How proactive do you have to be in making sure that those needs are met? How do you make sure, that those lines of communication are open?
Starting off with some of these cases that go on for years. So a few of my cases began before COVID. And then during COVID, there was this long pause where nothing moved. And now, 2, 3, 4 years after COVID, some of these phone calls are starting again, say, hey, remember me from 2018? Well, this case is finally going to trial 6 years later. So there are long periods of time where, yeah, there may or not be a phone call, an email, a touch base. One attorney actually started his own firm. He left the firm he began the case with and took it to his new firm with some assistance. So, people move, things move along, but I guess touching base at least once a year is advised, given how some of these cases could go on for what seemed like years and years.
Dr. Fishman, you brought up scheduling and making sure that people are on deadlines. How do you keep track of your own schedule and timing and making sure that you have sufficient time to do everything you need to do?
I turn work down. Cases can drag on, just like my colleague said, for years, and then they pop up out of the blue. And when it's usually a report is in 2 or 3 weeks. And at that point, you just have to clear your schedule and work around the clock 6 days a week and get it done. And it's just not possible with the level of detail and the level of technical accuracy required to work on more than one project at the same time. I mean, even if I have a couple associates on it, I have to be the primary author and have to be aware of every word and every sentence, every fact and figure, every audit trail, every document referenced in the discovery file. So the only way to handle a schedule is to work on one project at a time and accept there will be long idle periods in between projects, but to devote your time and attention to one client when their case is active.
Mr. Favetta, what's your scheduling strategy?
I've received calls from very frequent flyers, those attorneys that look to me for a quick update, something they need right away. And I'll say, yeah, I can get it done for tomorrow, but it's going to be a little extra. I need to put all their work on hold to put you as a priority. And so if the work is right, if it's nothing that requires too much time or too much detail, too much investigation, sure, happy to help and make it work, but there would be a little bit of an extra compensation for that rush.
One of the things that are difficult are communicating bad news, right? Sometimes we put in a lot of work and the answer is not going to be what the attorney and the end client want to hear. But it is our job as expert witnesses to adhere to the neutral truth. So when there is bad news, we have to give bad news. Mr. Klane, how do you go about communicating bad news to an attorney in a way that you can still maintain a positive working relationship with them?
Yeah, I think they very much respect and appreciate getting any news early on so that they can make decisions about direction and investing in a certain strategy or path. And so I try not to consider to what degree might this be good news or bad news for my client. It's just, is it relevant? Is it information? Is it something I've uncovered in my research or whatever? And then, alert them to it and have that conversation and say, I'm not sure how this affects it, because I acknowledge that's not my role to try to figure that out. But for me, this is a, serious whatever implication. It may favor things in this direction. It may not favor things in the other direction. A lot of the times there are several ways of looking at that. And what I've learned is I might think that it's not the best news. And then the client will come back and say, yep, got it, appreciate it. We're not going to go in that direction. We're going to go in this other direction. So they don't necessarily see it as a bad news. They see it as data that can help them take action in a more strategic direction.
So kind of spinning it into neutral news because
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, Noah, it's not my role to try to figure that out. When I try to figure that out, I've found it's not the most helpful. Now, I'm still fully honest and say, from my perspective, this is, not helpful to the case. However, here, I'm always then instantly looking for, if this is an impact to the case, here are other things, or here is where the strengths lie, or the single biggest strength is in this area. Again, strictly from my perspective, I don't know the law. I just know, the stuff that I do.
Dr. Fishman, same question. In obviously in the financial sector, securities valuation, I imagine that you have a fair amount of what I would call bad news to communicate. How do you tell a client that things are not going to go their way with regard to some information that you've uncovered via writing an expert report or being deposed or what have you?
Or doing market research or checking comps, or
Sure.
out when we dig into the data that the results are not as we hoped or anticipated. And the answer is there is no good or bad news. There's only objective news, which has to be put forth in the most straightforward and forthright manner possible at the earliest possible time, so that the attorneys may consider it in the broader context of the case to see if it even makes a difference. I've been in some situations where I won't say I panicked, but I was concerned that we discovered information doing research that would be a setback to the client. But in fact, the attorney either knew about it or wasn't concerned at all and had a different perspective where it could either be dismissed away in a line of questioning or overcome by some other information in the file. The point is to put all information in front of the attorneys that may affect the case at the earliest possible time and the most straightforward manner, so the attorneys may strategize. It's not the expert's job to strategize on the case.
Mr. Favetta, same question.
Yeah, no, I really think that early is key. We all agree on that. And it's one thing I mentioned in my pitch, in the initial interview stages, saying, please don't wait to loop me in on everything until you're down the line and finish with discovery, and then you need your expert report, whether it's for the plaintiff or defense. Keep me involved in discovery, share the documents with me, because now is the time, especially when discovery is open, to have all of those side and tangents and all the information available, so you'll know what's in the opposing expert report. You can get ahead of it and prepare more easily. It sure beats coming up with a strategy later on down the road and having them ultimately spend more money for an expert to find more information and go a little more in depth when your trial is set and you're just days away from that.
Let's talk a little bit about the ending of an engagement or the ending of a case. Now, I know that a lot of the time the expert witness is just brought in for a specific portion. They do their job and then they head out to onto their next engagement. But these cases, as you stated, might take years to wind up. Once your engagement is over, do you check up on the status of the case? Do you have any kind of post-engagement ritual to make sure that everything went smoothly, see how the case wound up, check in with the attorney? What do you do at the end of an engagement?
So my process, I typically don't ask specifics about the case, only because I don't want to, kind of infer that I want to be more involved or I'm looking for more engagement on that case. But I do try and keep that client relationship there, send either a warm wishes around the holidays card professionally, or even as a meteorologist. We had the big solar eclipse last year, and it coincided with the 10th anniversary of my company. So I thought, hey, this would be fun to send out the solar eclipse glasses to all the clients that I've worked with over the last few years. Kind of a fun little gimmicky thing to say, hey, we're still here if you have any more work. So beyond just keeping that relationship open with the maybe annual mailing that were available, no, I do not engage with like a follow-up of each individual case I've worked on.
Similar to what Mr. Favetta just said, I don't typically reach out beyond, you've got your final invoice. And in that, I just reflect, very happy to have done this for you, et cetera, et cetera. I don't ask about the outcome. I leave it up to them. If they tell me, I certainly welcome that news. Sometimes they will put in writing, sometimes they'll do a call. Most of the time, I don't always hear, and I just let it go. I don't track, some sort of like wins versus losses or anything like that. And so, I stay available, I stay in touch. I leave a lot of that up to the various clients. Again, expert witness, it has been something I've done plenty of, but it's never been the majority of my work, even as a consultant. And so it hasn't been something I've felt the need to follow up on. Plus, which it just seems to me that attorneys are very committed to not spending an additional minute on a case, or unbillable if they don't have to. So I try not to do anything that might then require a response. But I have had some very nice follow-ups from one attorney. It was, I think, my second case, first time in court. And I think I told this story in my other podcast with you, Noah, so I won't repeat it. But the short version is I made the jury laugh. And that was, according to the client, the gold. I didn't know. I was still pretty young and naive about this. And they were thrilled. They got a favorable decision and judgment and all of that. And so not only at the end, they complimented me, but she put it into the letter. I still have a copy of that letter. And you made the jury laugh. Oh my God, So sometimes those sorts of things can be really neat to do. Yeah.
Dr. Fishman, how do you wind up a case?
Okay, so my colleagues are correct that it's not really appropriate, or it's not done to check in with the attorneys to find out what happened. 9 times out of 10, these cases settle, and the terms of the settlement are sealed, confidential. Really none of my business, as curious as I am, who got what in the end, and how did my opinion influence it. If the attorney wants to share that with me, they will volunteer that. But my experience has been they're pretty reticent, and their obligations to the client. They have no obligations to me. So I respect that professional boundary. If I'm curious, and I confess, I keep an active PACER account, and I'll go on and I'll check the court filings and see if there's anything put into the record, or any post-trial motions, or if it's going to appeal. And then I'll have a sense what happened in the case, and if I may be needed in the future. The satisfaction in the case is by doing the work itself and getting paid. And if you did a good job, if you hear from the attorney 6 months, a year and a half down the road, as they have a different matter, then they have you in the back of their mind as somebody they want to work with again. And I've been fortunate. That's been my experience lately. But don't expect a call. I don't expect a call or a letter or congratulations or any sort of that kind of attaboy acknowledgement from an attorney, or finding out the results of the case, because it's just not part of the profession.
Results of the case aside, is it, Dr. Fishman, appropriate in your opinion for, let's say, a newer expert witness who is just getting started to just ask briefly about their performance?
Everyone does it in the start because they want to know. They want to know that they've got they're in the game. It's something, after years and years of doing it, it's just something you get over. You're not looking for the pat on the back. You're looking for the final check to come in and hear from them again for another case down the road.
Understood. Before we wrap up, I'd like to hear any final thoughts on today's panel topic, connections and relationships.
So I think, it's a fine balance between, nagging the clients that hired you, and also just being there waiting in the wings for when you are needed.
Sure.
Especially regarding when you want to know and follow about the case, if everything went through, or just to say, hey, I'm here if you need me for the next time. It was great working with you. Phone is always on, and I'm available to take your call.
Yeah, so it's been a great conversation with everyone, and I've enjoyed hearing from the others as well, and the back and forth that we enjoyed, and with you, Noah. I think, as we've been discussing here, somewhat relationships matter. Those I got to actually provide the citation. I would one of many would be, but a great one is Dale Carnegie, right? Chapter 3 of How to Make Friends and Influence People is you can't win an argument, which his use of it was more along the lines of relating to people for sales purposes. Obviously, arguments in our context here is very different. But I would also say it holds true. If expert witness, I had to learn this early. If an expert witness goes in thinking they're going to win the argument with opposing counsel, they've probably already lost before they've begun. I was cautioned by one of my early clients, an attorney, who pushed back against opposing counsel, who was clearly trying to do a lot of, hey, how you doing, John? Nice to meet you, et cetera, sort of the, let's make this person so comfortable with me that they just will engage in a conversation and all of that. And I could go down that rabbit trail a ways, but I won't. What I'd say instead, along the lines of the importance of relationships, is with one's client, relationships absolutely matter. And the way to do that for me, is the same as it always is. Besides the being an effective expert witness, and that includes, as I think we discussed, or I did, try to make it easy on your client. It's doing some of the relationship building things. It's, if they're open to it, having a little bit of fun banter. It's maybe getting into a little bit of the usual personal sort of stuff. I've gotten to know my one client in particular, very, very well, and he has gotten to know me, and that has translated into a lot more business for me now from him and from people he has referred to me. Obviously, a good part of that also is delivering the goods, right? Doing what I need to help educate him, to help him build his case. It's not my case. I'm not building it. I'm providing a service. I'm providing information, insights. Here's where I think the strengths are from my perspective. Here's where there's potential weaknesses. Again, from my perspective, which is good for him to hear. So how do we do, really, Noah, all of those typical things, but really seeing it as this is another person, they have a life. And on the one hand, I'm trying to provide a high quality service that helps them accomplish what they wish, which of course is win the case. And they may be plaintiff, they may be defense. I'm very agnostic about that.
Sure.
But it's also, here's a person, and how do we relate, and how do I do this? I was in business for myself for 13 years. The economy in 2011 finally caught up to us. But during that time period, I absolutely, if you were to say, John, what's the one thing that allowed you to sustain a good business for that time period till, the Great Recession beat you up? And that was multifactorial on the downside. But on the upside, it was absolutely relationship building, relationship marketing, which I learned from my dad, who was an on the road, over the road shoe salesman. And I saw him in action. And I guess the last thing I would say, and this is always a good way to have final thoughts, Noah, would be, you and I talked about it in my original interview in your podcast, was the powers of storytelling to do so many things, including relationship building, including being persuasive, including embedding your data, including, me, I study this, I practice it. I could go on and on and on, but the research is there. The practice and the human brain is absolutely wired for story. It is not wired for dry, dull data and statistics.
And that will conclude our show. I'd like to thank our esteemed panelists, Dr. Fishman, Mr. Klane, and Mr. Favetta for joining me here today. And I'd like to thank, as always, our listeners for joining us for another episode of Engaging Experts. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, Engaging Experts. Our show notes are available on our website, roundtablegroup.com.